You bought an NEMT company because you got bored of hitting golf balls at the club. It's just like every time I think about it, it makes me smile.
It's not your typical story.
I am here with Jeffrey Hoff, the owner of Reliant Transport. Jeff, how are you?
I'm great, Nirav. How about you?
Doing wonderful. Thanks for being with us. So you bought an NEMT company not so long ago. We'd love to hear your story. How did you go about it? Well, first of all, why did you do it? How did you go about it? And what were the factors you thought about in doing that deal and actually buying the company?
Got it.
So, but the first part, of course, is the fun one. I'd love for you to share the story about, why you did it, which I already know, but of course, for the benefit of the audience.
Fair enough. Well, thanks, Nirav. So, I was a banker for probably 35 years, and I did corporate finance and M&A, primarily focused on the media and telecom industries. And in 2018, I retired. And after about 6 months of getting up each morning and reading the paper for an hour or two and going to the fitness center, hitting some golf balls, I started to question myself and say, is this all there is? Is this what I've got for the next 20 or 30 years? So I started to look around and try to figure out if I could do something, on a part-time basis, something that wasn't going to require me to travel, do a lot of the things that I had done in my working life. And so I decided I'd start looking at the skills that I had developed during my career and actually be on the other side, look to buy a company. So a much different scale than what I had done on my working life, because it was my own personal capital. But just decided to look around, see if there was an opportunity to buy and run and manage a small company. So that was what kind of led me down the path. If you had asked me 5 years ago what NEMT stood for, I wouldn't have the faintest clue. So I went into the process, and really what I did was I had what I would call was deal filters. So what types of businesses would I look at? What was my criteria? And there were two things that I looked for. One was going to be a business that was recession resistant. Nothing is recession proof, but back from especially on the media side, I saw a lot of companies that, were relying on advertising and were subject to the cyclicality of advertising, and so what it did to those companies. So I decided I wanted to stay away from anything that would be subject to characteristics from a recession. The second thing I was looking for was something that had a recurring revenue or, a repeat customer. I dealt with a lot of companies that were subscription based, and that, that gives you a nice, steady, reliable cash flow. So those are the two things that I looked for. And then, kind of on a tertiary basis was, maybe something from a macro economic cycle, that would tie into that. And obviously, not knowing anything about healthcare, not knowing anything about transportation, the demographics and aging population certainly, were contributing factors. So after I developed those, sort of deal filters, if you will, I started looking at companies, actually reaching out to, business brokers and looking on the web and everything else. And there's a range of quality of guys that are in the business broker role. So, you have to, it's a networking process where you find some that are credible and good and are good to interact with. And then you kind of get them to refer you others. So you gradually build a network and find your way in. Interestingly enough, so think about my deal filters: recession resistant and recurring revenue. So one of the first businesses that I looked at and got a little interested in was liquor stores. Definitely something that's going to be recession resistant. I kind of went to, and in North Carolina, all liquor stores are state owned, but in South Carolina, they're privately owned. So Charlotte is on the southern part of the state, and it's not far from South Carolina. So I looked at one or two of those, and then when I went to my family board, my wife asked me if I was crazy, and said, hell no. And so we took liquor stores off the board. And I started looking at a bunch of landscaping companies. And I thought, guys mowing my lawn and stuff, but it ended up being a lot more corporate accounts and doing more corporate work than residential. So that was interesting. I got very close on one of those, and then kind of fell away. And then I found my first NEMT business that was actually about an hour north of here, and it was in Raleigh. And I got very interested to the point where I made an offer on the company. We got the company under a letter of intent, and as we were starting to move towards close, the owner picked up the phone and called me and said, "Oh, I just need to tell you that we just lost one of our key customers." And I hesitated a little bit. I went back and looked at some numbers and did some thinking and stuff, and went back and said, "Listen, I consider still moving forward, but we're going to need to adjust the price." And she was, "No, I don't want to adjust the price. I'd rather go back and rebuild the business for a year or two and then go back to sell it." So I said, fine. And I think it was through that process that the broker on that deal knew somebody else that had another NEMT business for sale in Winston-Salem, which is how I came across this company.
Jeff, I love your story because you bought an NEMT company because you got bored of hitting golf balls at the club. It's just like every time I think about it, it makes me smile.
It's not your typical story.
No.
And I am a 10 handicap, by the way. I guess it's just too frustrating trying to get to an 8 or a 6, so I'd rather just do something else.
Which is manage a non-emergency medical transportation business.
Exactly.
So you come across Reliant Transport then, or whatever it was called at the time. And now you're approaching this company and you're evaluating, hey, do I want to buy this business? How did you evaluate the business and decide these are the terms at which I'll buy this NEMT company?
Right. So again, this in this particular case, there was a broker involved. She wasn't terribly knowledgeable about the company, so she gave me some initial financial information, and I started going through it, and obviously I started having questions. I went back to her a couple of times with questions, and then finally she basically just turned me over to the owner of the company. So I started asking my questions directly, of the previous owner, and a lot of that, it's about the financials. It's about the customer base. It's about how are you getting paid? Are you getting paid within terms, or are your receivables dragged out? What are your key costs? Tell me about your insurance. So you go through a whole diligence list that ultimately leads you to meeting with the previous owner and sitting down and having a conversation, coming and looking at the vehicles, looking at the assets, and then getting to a point where you're comfortable enough to make a written offer. And obviously that, I'm familiar with some of the legalese at that point. A lot of people, and I did too. You get an attorney involved to help write the letter of intent. I also, once I got a written letter of intent, in terms of the diligence that I was doing before I got to close, I actually engaged an outside accountant to just help me go through, because you're dealing with tax returns. It's not like you've got a large company with audited financials by a Big Four firm. That's not the case. So you're looking at a lot of information that's, sometimes it's compilations of financials that and nobody's really looked at. So you make sure that, I had an accountant that went back and ticked and tied back to, bank statements, to the financial information I was given, to make sure everything just tied out and was verified. So that was the process that I went through. Again, that was just kind of how I was sort of trained to do it.
So what I want to dig into a little more, if you can share, is, you evaluate the assets of the company, the vehicles, the contracts, whatever it has, and you ultimately have to come down to a number and say, hey, this is how much I will pay you for this business based on all these factors I've evaluated about whatever assets the business had. Like, what was sort of the trickiest part of that, or any insight you can share for some of our viewers who may be interested in buying an NEMT company at some point?
Sure. So, everything is measured on what's called EBITDA, earnings before depreciation, interest, and taxes. That's sort of the definition of cash flow. So you get, what is a good EBITDA. There are always some current owners are going to want to take out all, they've got certain things in there that aren't necessarily part of the company operations, and there are other things, they may want to take out all of their time, which may or not be appropriate, because you need to have somebody running the business. So anyway, you come to some sense of an agreeable adjusted EBITDA, and then you look at what the appropriate industry multiple is, for that EBITDA. And again, it depends upon what's in the EBITDA and what's excluded from the EBITDA. But, typically for smaller middle market companies, like, there's something in the 3 to 4 times EBITDA is a reasonable multiple. And then you're going to be influenced by, you mentioned before, the assets, the vehicles. Do you have, I bought 6 vehicles, several of which were, a few years old, and a couple of which were newer. So you look at the vehicles and the mileage, those are the assets that are going to generate that cash flow or EBITDA. So you need to determine whether you need to reinvest in those assets in order to generate that EBITDA on a go-forward basis.
And were the existing employees, like your dispatchers and drivers, part of that equation?
So the way it works is North Carolina is, an at-will state. So we literally, I didn't, I only had feedback from the current owner about what she thought would happen. In the description, for me, the 2 key people were, the dispatcher, and then there was a guy that was kind of more general operations, and it was keeping them and then having the staff of drivers to begin with. And so we literally, we closed the deal, let's say on Monday. I came up to the offices on Tuesday, and she announced the deal to the employees. They didn't technically know anything about it before. And the way the deal was cut was that I would hire all of the employees to be part of my company. And that released her of any obligations for their payment after the sale of the company.
Got it. So it was pretty clean after you made the offer and decided, hey, this is the takeover date.
It was clean day one. I wouldn't say it was clean down the road, but it was clean day one.
Awesome. And I hope and assume that you have a healthier mix now between hitting goals at the club and, doing more engaging things.
So, interesting. So I knew getting it, that buying an NEMT business was not a match with my background. And, I was putting capital in, both personal and borrowed, and I needed to learn the business. So I knew it was going to be 12 or 18 months that I was going to be engaged in the business, on a daily basis. And for the first 6 months, I came up Monday morning, went home Thursday night or Friday afternoon. So I was here every day. I mean, of course, everybody knows that NEMT businesses are great because you have a laptop and a phone, you can do it from anywhere. All of our, not only we've got a dispatch system that, is now Bambi, but
Bambi run.
but we also have cameras in every vehicle, so we can monitor everything from anywhere. But also think about it, I closed on the acquisition of the company in June of 2019. So just as I was kind of getting to what I thought was going to be my ability to pull out, we went into a global pandemic. So April, May, all of the doctor's offices here closed. We were fortunate. We had about half of our volume was dialysis patients. So, we kind of ticked down during that period of time, but then quickly were able to bounce back up. By August, we were kind of back at our normal run rate. I was fortunate. I applied for and received some PPP money, and I kept all of the drivers fully employed. In some cases, I paid them for hours in those couple of months of April and May that they weren't actually working. But I did, I do say that I used the PPP money as it was intended to do to keep people at work. So we did that. So fast forward today. I mean, I bought it in June of 19. I'm coming up on my fifth anniversary. So now I'm watch the business daily. I'm not going to say it, but I'm here physically in the offices 1 to at most 2 days a week. I've got a great operations manager that runs the day-to-day business, as well as a dispatch manager, and between the two of them, they do a great job. I get in the way if I try to do too much, but I do a lot of the invoicing and billing and handling relationships with a lot of our facilities and try to develop new business and those kinds of things. So that's a little bit of a different role.
How has the size of the business changed from when you bought it nearly 5 years ago to today?
So interesting you should ask, and I don't know if I've got that handy, but because I was actually doing a budget for 2024 last week. Our trip volume since I don't count 2019 because it was really only a half year under our ownership, but 2020 to the end of 2023, our trip volume has almost doubled. We've gone from about 6,000 trips to this year we'll do about 11,000 trips.
Wow. So you've doubled the business since you bought it.
Double the business from a trip volume perspective. We've financially, I think our revenue is probably close to doubled, and probably our revenue per trip has gone up about 25 or 30%. So there's a lot. There's a lot of moving parts in the last several years between COVID and employment needing to increase wages, due to market conditions, gas prices. When I first came in, fuel was 2 something, then it went to 5, it was 5 something. So, our monthly fuel bill was around 2,000, and I think last year, has peaked at 6,000 a month at time. So, it's just, there's just a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, there always are.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. Like, if you could go back to the time that you were actually buying the business, are there parts of it that you would do differently? I mean, you mentioned that it all was pretty smooth, at least on day one, the transition. But in terms of the process of deciding to buy it, coming up with an offer, doing your diligence, and then doing the handover, is there anything that, hindsight sort of tells you, oh, I should have done this or that differently?
So it's interesting, kind of in the lower end of the market, the way transactions are done is that there's a transition period built into the deal with the existing owner. So automatically, the previous owner stays on for 30 days to kind of help get you to know the systems and the people, and take you around to the customers and all that. I had actually negotiated with the previous owner a consulting contract to stick around for 6 months at sort of 20 hours a week, just to help me part-time, to help continue to develop business and do things. During our 30-day transition period, it sort of became evident that probably wasn't a good idea, and it's hard, I get it. It's hard, it's hard to get to let go of your company. And it's your baby, and, we're trying to define a role, and it got to a situation where, the consulting contract was to kick in the following Monday. My 30 days was up, and I called my attorney and said, we need to cancel this consulting agreement. So I terminated that, which, to be honest, that was a tough decision at the time to fly a little bit blind, but the situation was such that was not going to be beneficial to the company or to me. So, those are the little things. One thing we didn't talk about, and the other thing to talk about is financing. You talk about how do you get a deal closed. And so one thing I will mention, that the structure, the way I structured my transaction, I did what's called a ROBS, a rollover to buy a business startup. And what it allows you to do, and there are advisors out there that help walk you through this. It wasn't anything that I'd ever heard of before in my corporate life, but it allows you to take money in your 401k and use that as the equity to purchase the company. So it's a very, and again, I use a company called Bennett Trends. There are a couple others out there, but they go through and set up a set of legal documents. You really you set up a qualified 401k plan that the sole investment is in this company. And the key benefit is when you sell the company, that money goes back into your 401k on a pre-tax basis. So everything is done on a tax deferred basis. So I put money in on a pre-tax basis. It comes back out and doesn't get taxed until I distribute it from my 401k. I also used SBA financing, and don't be afraid to use SBA financing. I went with a company I knew. I used Wells Fargo and got connected with an SBA. Or it's 1,000 pieces of paper. They want everything, and they want to tie you up in 16 different ways and have you pledge all of your assets and personally guarantee, and you're right. And so, it can be a little scary from that perspective, but if you do it, on a conservative basis, it's good capital to have. A lot of times the brokers will say, hey, you can get 90% SBA financing. Well, that means that a lot of your cash flow is tied up in repaying the SBA. So basically, you're continuing to work for the man. You're not working for yourself. So I did something that was about half and half. Used half equity, half SBA debt. I get to now pay myself something, and I pay the SBA, but I'm not working for the SBA. So,
any regrets, Jeff? Running an NEMT business is no piece of cake.
No, it's a constant learning process, right? Which to me is the benefit. It keeps me engaged and it keeps me growing. Do I wish I had known a couple more things earlier than I did rather than have to learn them the hard way? Absolutely. But that's going to be true in most situations.
If anyone has any questions for Jeff, just write to us at contact@bambi.health.
Perfect. Happy to answer any questions or help in any way I can. Run, Bambi, run.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.